Let's begin by zeroing in on one of the most misunderstood aspects of human performance, your ability to direct your attention. In other words, your focus. This ability is governed primarily by a region of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, a part of the frontal lobe that essentially acts as the command center for executive function. It's what allows you to plan, to prioritize, to resist impulses, and to control attention in a highly targeted, goal-directed manner. Without the prefrontal cortex, your thoughts would scatter, your behaviors would become reactive, and your decision-making would be hijacked by impulse rather than intention. Now, here's the fascinating thing. The prefrontal cortex is not just a cognitive machine. It's an energy, sensitive, stimulus-responsive structure, which means that its performance depends heavily on how much input it's receiving at any given moment. When you're immersed in external noise, constant notifications, background chatter, multitasking, or rapid task switching, your prefrontal cortex gets overwhelmed. It becomes metabolically fatigued. And once that happens, your brain switches from deliberate thinking to default patterns. You become reactive instead of strategic. Your ability to make high-quality decisions sharply declines, and over time, your baseline for attention and mental endurance drops lower and lower. But stillness changes that. When you remove external noise, when you intentionally reduce movement, disengage from visual distractions, and let your system settle, you begin to activate the prefrontal cortex in a very different way. You give it room to breathe. And more importantly, you reduce what's known as sensory load, the amount of data the brain must filter and process at any given moment. Think of it like this. Your prefrontal cortex is a spotlight. It can illuminate the path ahead with precision, but only if it's not being drowned out by 1,000 flickering lights around it. In stillness, those distractions fade, and that's when the spotlight can do its real job. This isn't just poetic, it's physiological. Functional MRI studies show that when participants sit quietly in environments with minimal sensory stimulation, the prefrontal cortex exhibits more coherent patterns of activity. It starts firing in a synchronized way, allowing for stronger top-down controls. That means better planning, sharper attention, more refined emotional regulation. It's like tuning an instrument. You're aligning the brain's executive functions to operate with clarity and coherence. And the benefits don't just emerge during the stillness, they persist afterwards. When you engage in even 5 to 10 minutes of structured stillness, you enhance what's called attentional control for several hours afterward. This is what athletes call being locked in, what creators call flow, and what neuroscientists refer to as a state of prefrontal dominance, where your executive systems are in the driver's seat and your distractions are in the back seats. Now let's talk about why this is so critical in today's world. You're living in a time where your attention is being monetized. Every app, every platform, Every headline is engineered to fracture your focus into 1,000 pieces. And when that happens, your prefrontal cortex gets less and less time to train its full capacity. It's like a muscle that never gets to fully extend because it's always twitching. And the more you live in that mode, the harder it becomes to think clearly, to prioritize deeply, and to regulate emotions under pressure. Stillness then is not optional. It's foundational. It's not something soft. It's not a luxury. It's a hard reset for your most powerful neural assets. And there's more. Inside the prefrontal cortex is an area called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which plays a critical role in working memory, the ability to hold and manipulate information. This is vital not just for focus, but for creativity, for strategic thinking, and for learning. In stillness, as sensory noise drops, working memory capacity improves. You remember more. You think deeper. You connect dots you couldn't see before. Even the medial prefrontal cortex, which is tied to your sense of self and internal narrative, becomes more organized during silent, still periods. This helps you regulate emotion, detach from unhelpful thought loops, and step into a more objective mindset. All of this points to one fact: stillness is not the absence of brain activity. It is the refinement of it. It is not idling. It is tuning. When you stop moving, when you close your eyes, when you quiet the visual and auditory world around you, your brain doesn't go dark. It goes precise. And that precision is exactly what the modern mind is starving for. The most successful, focused, high-performing individuals across domains have one thing in common. They know when to engage and when to withdraw, when to act and when to become still, because they understand something neuroscience is now proving. When you harness stillness, you don't shut down your power, you aim it. Let's dive deeper into one of the most overlooked components of mental performance, your nervous system state. Because here's the truth: your ability to focus, learn, recover, and execute isn't just about willpower. It's about physiology. And unless you understand how your nervous system operates and how to shift it into the right gear at the right times, you'll constantly be working against your own biology without even realizing it. At the center of this conversation is something called autonomic balance. Your autonomic nervous system is made up of two branches. The sympathetic branch, often called the fight or flight system, and the parasympathetic branch, known as rest and digest. Both are essential. The sympathetic system mobilizes you. It gives you alertness, energy, and response readiness. But it comes at a cost. It burns fuel. It narrows perception. It's optimized for survival, not long-term growth. And when you're constantly in that state, your cognitive performance starts to break down. This is where stillness enters as a powerful intervention. Because true stillness, stillness of the body, stillness of the breath, stillness of the mind, triggers a very specific physiological response. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system. And when that system takes the wheel, something profound happens. Your body shifts from defense mode to recovery mode. Cortisol levels drop. Heart rate slows. Blood pressure stabilizes. But more importantly, your brain begins to repair. See, most people think of rest as doing nothing. But in neuroscience, rest is a highly active process. During parasympathetic dominance, your brain enters a phase of cognitive recalibration. Synaptic strength returns. Glial cells begin clearing out metabolic waste. And the very neurochemicals responsible for focus, dopamine, acetylcholine, and norepinephrine, are replenished. This is how elite performers, athletes, entrepreneurs, creators train not just to go hard, but to recover hard. Because if you never downshift, your system can't rebuild. And without recovery, there is no sustained performance. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Studies have shown that people who intentionally activate their parasympathetic system through breath work, stillness, or focused silence show higher levels of attentional control across the board. Their reaction times improve. Their error rates drop. Their working memory becomes sharper. This is because a rested brain is a responsive brain. It doesn't just work harder, it works smarter. Let's break this down even further. When you're in sympathetic mode, your pupils dilate, your vision narrows, your body mobilizes blood to the muscles, and your brain prioritizes short-term action. You are not built to solve complex problems in that state. You are built to react. But when you transition into parasympathetic dominance, everything shifts. Your vision softens. Your breath slows. Blood returns to the digestive system and to the prefrontal cortex. And suddenly, long-term thinking becomes available again. You're not just reacting, you're observing. You're not impulsive, you're strategic. And this transition doesn't take hours. It can happen in minutes. In fact, even 1 to 3 minutes of structured stillness, no phone, no talking, no visual stimulation, can begin the process. You can literally use your physiology to guide your psychology. The key lies in intention. You must choose stillness. You must decide to disengage from the speed and noise that hijacks your nervous system. And when you do, you create the internal space for real focus to emerge. We often hear phrases like, train your focus, build your attention, master your mind. But those things are not built in chaos. They're built in calm. They are sculpted in silence. And this is what the science supports when the parasympathetic system is activated. The brain is better able to encode information, retain learning, and generate insights. The hippocampus, responsible for memory formation, becomes more active. Neuroplasticity increases, and new connections between neurons are more likely to form and stick. Stillness isn't about zoning out. It's about tuning in. It's about stepping back from the overstimulation that keeps your brain in a constant state of vigilance and stepping into a mode where your brain can begin to repair and rewire itself. And this isn't just about the brain. It's about the body too. When parasympathetic tone is high, inflammation decreases. Immune function improves. Recovery from both physical and mental exertion accelerates. Your entire system becomes more resilient. And this resilience is the foundation of elite mental performance. Because no matter how driven you are, how smart you are, or how much caffeine you drink, if your nervous system is locked in sympathetic overdrive, your brain will not perform at its best. You'll be fast, but you won't be precise. You'll be reactive, but not responsive. You'll be wired, but not wise. Stillness shifts that. It gives you back control. It resets the system. It's like pressing the clutch on a high performance vehicle. You're not stopping the engine. You're preparing to shift into the next gear with more power, more direction, and far greater control over the road ahead. Let's turn our attention now to something that might completely change the way you think about rest, boredom, and silence. Because contrary to popular belief, your brain is not idle when you're doing nothing. In fact, some of the most sophisticated and powerful brain activity happens not when you're actively focused, but when you allow yourself to be still, to disengage, and to mentally wander. And the system responsible for this, it's called the default mode network, or DMN. The default mode network is a set of interconnected brain regions that becomes active when you're not paying attention to the outside world. When you're not scrolling, not analyzing, not chasing, but simply sitting in silence, undistracted, this network switches on. And when it does, something remarkable begins to happen. Your brain doesn't power down. It powers inward. It begins to generate ideas, revisit memories, simulate future possibilities, and form connections between seemingly unrelated concepts. The default mode network is essentially your brain's inner theater. It's where daydreams take shape, where creativity is born, and where insight is refined. And in many ways, it operates like a backstage crew, quietly assembling the framework for breakthroughs while the rest of your attention is offstage. But here's the challenge in our modern world. The default mode node network is being drowned out. It's constantly interrupted by noise, notifications, deadlines, and artificial urgencies. We spend so much time in active consumption mode that we rarely give our brain the space it needs to integrate what we've consumed. Stillness reopens that space. It quiets the outside world so that the inside world can be heard again. And this isn't just theory, it's measured science. Functional MRI scans show that during periods of rest or wakeful stillness, the brain doesn't go quiet. In fact, the default mode network becomes more metabolically active than many other networks involved in task execution. Meaning, when you're not forcing thought, when you're just allowing stillness to settle in, your brain starts doing some of its deepest, most creative work. Let me give you an example you've probably experienced. You've been trying to solve a problem for hours. Maybe it's a creative block, a business strategy, or a personal dilemma. nothing clicks. So you step away. Maybe you take a shower. Maybe you go for a walk with no music, no podcast, just you and your thoughts. And suddenly the answer comes out of nowhere. A solution that felt unreachable is now obvious. That moment, that's the default mode network in action. That's not coincidence. It's biology. What's happening in that moment is that your brain is integrating stored knowledge, current emotion, memory, recall, and even subconscious beliefs, and it's stitching them together to produce insight. This is what creativity really is. Not just invention from nothing, but recombination of everything you already know into something entirely new. But the default mode network can't do its job under pressure. It doesn't respond well to urgency or stimulus overload. It responds to space, to slowness, to stillness. Now, here's where this becomes even more fascinating. Creativity isn't just for artists. It's essential to problem solving, to leadership, to emotional intelligence. It's what allows you to adapt, to innovate, to see what others don't. And if you never give your default mode network the stage, you miss out on that edge. But you become efficient, but not imaginative, productive, but not visionary. You check boxes, but you stop seeing possibilities that aren't already written down. Neuroscience now tells us that training your brain to enter this mode intentionally by practicing stillness is a competitive advantage. You are literally increasing the surface area of connection between distant ideas. You're creating neural flexibility, and this flexibility is what allows you to shift perspectives, to step outside yourself, and to develop solutions that others can't see because they're too busy doing to think. Stillness also allows for self-reflections. The default mode network isn't just a creativity machine. It's also closely tied to your sense of self, your moral reasoning, and your ability to evaluate past experiences. So when you give space for this system to activate, you're not just coming up with ideas. You're processing who you are, what you value, and what decisions align with the person you're becoming. That's why people report breakthroughs in self-awareness, emotional clarity, and long-term planning after periods of quiet. The mind isn't wandering aimlessly. It's wandering wisely. And there's one more layer to this. The default mode network thrives on contrast. It activates most powerfully when you move from intense focus into stillness. That's why those transitions right after a workout, right after deep work, or right before sleep are so powerful for creative insight. You've built up cognitive pressure, and now you're releasing it. And in that release, your brain reorganizes. So if you've been taught that stillness is passive, that silence is lazy, or that doing nothing is unproductive, you've been taught wrong. From a neurological perspective, stillness is one of the most powerful things you can practice. It reclaims access to your default mode network. It reopens the internal workshop of your mind. It unlocks the creativity, strategy, and clarity that cannot emerge under pressure or noise or constant stimulus. So what we've uncovered today is that stillness is not the absence of progress. It's the mechanism by which the brain restores, refines, and reinvents itself. When you become still, you don't shut the system down. You activate its most intelligent and integrative functions. You allow the prefrontal cortex to come back online so your decisions are intentional, not reactive. You shift into parasympathetic dominance so your body and brain can recover and prepare for higher performance. And you access the default mode network, which is where creativity, strategy, and insight are born, not under pressure, but in pause. We live in a culture that idolizes constant motion, but biology doesn't lie. Focus, clarity, cognitive resilience, these are not built through chaos. They are built in moments of deliberate silence. You train your brain to perform under pressure by teaching it how to recover before the pressure arrives. You build depth not by doing more, but by allowing more space between the doing. Stillness is not a weakness. It's not laziness. It's one of the most powerful cognitive tools you can use to elevate your thinking, regulate your emotions, and reclaim ownership over your attention. The science is clear. And so is the path if you want to sharpen your mind, strengthen your focus, and unlock a deeper level of creative intelligence. You have to stop chasing the noise and start mastering the silence. Because the brain does not evolve in chaos. It evolves in clarity. And clarity begins in stillness.